Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Oki naganago meko chejes to komaki de coats nagotine siku. Hello and welcome, folks. My name's Michelle. I'm the lead and the founder of this book club. It originally started with 12 Community Safety Initiative with chapters in chat. And that was way back in 2016. And since then, we've done tons of reading. I just want to ask people respect the rules that Indigenous people speak first. And that, we just try to share maybe in a circle. Prior to us going onto Zoom from the pandemic, we did share in circle. And so what that means is that we don't speak over each other. And as an Indigenous person, I think it will be important for me to interject from time to time, and especially if people haven't done anti-racism work up to now. So welcome, Angela, and I hope you enjoy our crowd. Carol is listening in as well, so we'll go from there. And yeah, I just want to start by acknowledging the lands that we're on. We're in Mohkinstsis, Blackfoot territory. And then in 1877, Treaty 7 was signed with the Crown, which has been a broken treaty since. And so to me, it's important to acknowledge that whose land this actually is. And there's actually 0 Blackfoot in the room. And it's important to acknowledge that power dynamic. It's important for settlers to see the power dynamic of broken treaties and oppression as a result that continues today, and genocide that continues today. And obviously the subject is incredibly much on that. So I think I'll get started with talking about the book. I'm going to share screen actually as well, just because this is where I was at. Share. And yeah, I wanted to start by reading a little bit of this conclusion because I think it's really important, because it just outright says the words that the histories of the cemeteries that were found at former Indian residential school sites are evidence of genocide and mass human rights violations. And of course, this would be coming from volume 4 of the Missing Children and Unmarked Burials, which it referenced regularly. So this book club selection, I think, is important for all Canadians. I think it's important for us as all Canadians to continue this work and to know the findings now that there was some of the funding that was recommended back in 2015, that this was some of the work that they were able to do. And I found that this particular one was very difficult for me because it extensively went over my granny's residential school, which my daughter and I have been on those grounds as well. And there are articles about it as well. I've shared a million times. So I just wanted to start talking about page 10, where Duncan Campbell Scott, is mentioned in his very condescending, bullish, genocidal behavior is really documented quite well there. On page 12, the parallels of dehumanizations of othering children and the concept of being ungrievable. And for me, I finally have found the reason why it is Canadians are so lackadaisical and complacent with genocide, because by othering us and dehumanizing us, they allow us and our children to not be properly grieved. And I think about a lot of the families that I have met, usually killed from police violence or violence in general, and then the lack of humanity gifted to them from police. And I've shared with this group before when my father-in-law passed away, watching the RCMP literally break down and cry for telling my husband that his white father died, and how that, the RCMP member, he was crying because he recently lost his dad, so this was very triggering for him, and he showed so much humanity and empathy for my husband. But conversely, I have helped how many Indigenous families, and not only are they not treated with that kind of love and respect and empathy, but they're worse treated as they are worse than dogs. Like, I've seen dogs treated better by police in houses than I've seen Indigenous people who have lost somebody who they loved and not be given that same amount of love and care and respect. And worse, checks down on everybody, screaming at the mom to shut the fuck up. I've seen that type of behavior. But this particular part, the ungrievable, explains it so well, how dehumanized as Indigenous people we are in the eyes of Canadians, and why it is, when we had read Volume 4 long before the 1215, and how we said, no, we should do something. And, that was kind of the start of the conversation of, we didn't call it Reconciliation Action Group at the time, but that bigger picture of, we are going to start to act. We're going to start to do more, because it was very clear we had to do more. And the same feelings I get from that book club then, and then after the gaslighting from the 215, and even to today, that these are the feelings I get, and that dehumanization, which wasn't articulated in Volume 4 like it was in this report. So I really appreciated the 3 patterns of untraceable lives, about, the death produced by Indian residential school, the denial of grief. It was very hard. The disrespect for the dead is the third. It was really hard to, like, you know, and I've heard it from elders, but she so well articulated the fact that, these children are crying in their beds for their brother, their sister, or their classmate, that, and are shushed and beaten for crying, because they're not allowed to grieve for their friend, for their family member that just had died, knowing too they didn't have the love and support of their family, as well, while watching these horrific, inhumane deaths. So it really hit home, a lot of this. Um, Another part that was very difficult for me as somebody who was a drafter, like when we look at some of these, professional drafts, like this one right here, um, this is exactly what I would have made, only it would have been a well site or a pipeline. So for me, seeing the initials of the drafter RSS, mine was MMR, it's very personal to me, for me to imagine drafting a cemetery, and drafting a cemetery of children, and how disconnected the survey industry is, from the gravity of this as well. Because I know I easily could have drafted that. There would have been zero emotion attached to it, zero ceremony. It's just done. That this is an hour draft, if that, and then it's given to the land surveyor to be certified, and then it's done. And yeah, that's that. So just knowing how cold it is to see this, knowing that it would have been my job to draft this and not care about the fact this is actually an Indian residential school. These are the grounds, these are the cemeteries. Nobody really cares. Just draft that lot one right away because it's important, you know. Um, so yeah, it was very much a reminder of how callous and colonial the science of surveying is, and geomatics, when applied to, um, in this case, like dead children. Um, it's been very hard. The Fort Providence part starts on page 37, and it was good 5 pages, and it hit me pretty hard, because well, I've been there, I've seen it, I've taken pictures, I've posted my own pictures of that because it's my granny's, and they're very clear about the folks who had to advocate for it to be respected. And I've talked before about how the marker and graves that are there are written prior to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the language is very clear. And I would like to see it updated because it's so horrific. And so to see it in black and white in a new report in 2024, it I really appreciated it to see that. That's for sure. Um, I learned, I didn't know that mass graves is largely undefined in international law. That was new to me. I thought there was kind of a better standard about what a mass grave is. And, and I get really offended by these denialists. I remember when the floods happened and we had some of their graves locally here, transferred out. And on page 59, they talked about the University of Saskatchewan's anthropology department excavating 72 individuals. It was only recorded 50, but it was 72 in the end that they excavated. And, I had to take a lot of time going through this because when you have children who purposely had a suicide pack and ate poisonous root, I wish that was pause for everybody. But as she so well articulated, the othering of Indigenous people, like that is why I think the average Canadian doesn't give a flying rat's butt about this. But it was very hard for me to know that children thought this was the best decision. And as far as I know, this is one of the first documentations of, suicide packs that I had ever seen. And thanks, Canada, for inventing that. Um, Another thing I learned of was this registration of death of an Indian. That was a little hard for me to read, as well as the RV park on the cemetery. Yeah, I've been really impacted by reading this, just as I was with the final reports, volume 4, and disappointed at how few Canadians have read it, talked about it, and I'm just going to stop the share here and just give the floor to others. So. We'll let Angela, Carol, Kat, Marnie, and Wendy I'm just going by the participants list. So I'll pass it over to Angela, and then Angela will pass it over to Carol.
I just want to be clear. I'm a white settler. I'm not Indigenous. So if I need to go later, I will, please let me know.
So are you passing it to Carol?
Yes, I'll pass it to Carol right now.
I'm also a white settler. So
everyone here is a white settler but me. So I'm just trying to give you guys all space. So if you guys just want to pass, it's okay. But okay.
But I mean, I wasn't able to read this, but I have to say, Michelle, like I have encountered people who make comments about this, and I'm so offended by it. And I can't imagine what it's like for someone such as yourself to read through this and then have someone disqualify it or, challenge the truth of it. But I do hear that, and I did have a conversation with a woman about it recently. Not this specific thing, but residential schools and children and burials, and she tried to tell me that 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 it wasn't all true, and I was so offended. I was so offended by it, and I just said to her, "You need to read. You need to read because this is racism. This is you not wanting to accept what's happened, and if you don't, you will never know the truth." So that's my only comment about that, Michelle. Sorry, I can't even look at the screen because
No, that's okay. long before I used to just take the PDF link and like give it to people in good faith, not realizing how people aren't commenting in good faith about those things. And, they want to believe a lie, so that's why they perpetuate it. And, I would, I'd never, I'd never undermine a veteran's experience, a Holocaust experience, somebody who's undergone a genocide in Africa. I would never undermine their experience, yet it gets done to me all the time. And the amount of people that don't read these types of things, and the sad part is that the ones that do should be educating others and choose not to, right? So, um, at the end of the day, this is we're the first generation to have like something to give someone, other than our like oral stories, and to say, no, my grandmother told me this, my auntie told me this, and tell people, we're the first generation to say, no, here's like digital evidence, here's like the survey plans where they plan for the cemeteries before they even fucking made the schools. And like you have a population that thinks Trump's amazing and these are all lies. So you can't, like, that's not in good faith. Can't have conversations in good faith. And I hope you can all understand why it is. One, I block people without even a fucking second thought. And two, why this has absolutely ruined my relationships with friends and family. Because this is not negotiable, right? Like this is not negotiable. And there are people who think it is negotiable. So yeah,
Well,
that's what I would
part
say.
of her, I don't know what indignation, if that's the right word, was like that she didn't feel she had to keep paying for past wrongs. And she didn't see any kind of concern about saying it to a woman who's an Indigenous neighbor, like, when do we stop having to pay? And I was just shocked. I was just horrified. I said to her, what makes you think that that is a good thing to say to anybody?
Mhm.
And she said, well, I know her and it's okay. I said, it's not okay. And I think you should ask her if she thought it was okay. And I don't feel the same about this person anymore. I don't want to talk to her, but I feel like I have to, because maybe I can put a little crack in that darkness in her brain about this. But anyway, it's terrible, terrible.
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, whoever this friend is, I'm sure she just smiles and nods like I have to do every goddamn day too. So,
Well, she no, she's trying to defend herself, and I'm like, this is indefensible. Like, I can't hear this. You're not correct here. So
for sure. Kat, would you like to chime in?
Yes, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Kat, a white settler, obviously. Um, I am grateful to have read this report because like Michelle said, it has receipts, it has the images, it has the documentation, it has everything in there for people to know what happened. And to me, it was difficult to read because it shows the pure evil that took place and is still taking place, especially by people who deny that residential schools happened. It was just, yeah, disgusting and evil how institutional it was, and how the government colluded with like all their departments, health, police, um, justice, and the churches to perpetuate this system. And I just wanted to say, Canada, guess what? You're not nice. We're not nice. We have this genocide that occurred for a few, like a while ago, and it is still going on. So we have to recognize this and take away the niceness and um, face the truth. And something I did not know was about the forced marriages. That was good information to have as well. The fact that Indigenous lives were so controlled from cradle to grave, even telling people who they can marry, that's just bad. And also, obviously, to have children, forced labor, forced to dig graves for other children. How can you think that we live in a nice country when this happened? I just want to say, fuck you, Canada. And I'm done.
Yeah, I remember reading in the TRC about the forced marriages. And I asked my granny about it, but she kind of undermined it at the time. But I don't think she was very empowered to talk about those things at that time either. So I know it's not new to me, but I know like that was a lot of volumes that we had to go through. And that's been a couple of years already, hasn't it? So I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I
Yeah.
forgot. I forgot about it. So
It's
I'm
so much. It is so much. Like even if you go through it over and over again, it's a lot. So it's and at least you're trying. Like most people don't even try, right? So
I am trying. Thank
you
you.
all right, Marnie.
Just want to add to something you said, Kat. I don't think the worst is what we did. I think the worst is what we're doing now, including disowning what we did. That's what I think is worse. And, we've read a lot of stuff in this book club, and I haven't been always able to attend, but I've read a lot of it. And this, I think, along with Five Little Indians, has been the most impactful for me. I don't know what it was about this report compared with others. I don't know. But man, so this was the only piece of paper I had near me, so I had it, and I just want to pull out some of the things that that painful chapters in any country's history are essential parts of that history, can't be denied, and that's, I think, what our problem is. And this, I'm thinking, is true with so much of what's going on now all over the world, that impunity is the ability to forget it even happened. You can just move along with it. The ungrievable. I was just talking to my husband about this. It's yeah. And that how assimilation, I thought this was so well said, how assimilation changes form as needed. So you have the residential schools, and then so then you start having the foster, the adoption stuff, it's just, yeah. And that these children's deaths were a lamentable necessity to facilitate settlement. But, yeah, I could go on. So several things. This was an interesting idea, that ideology is embedded in maps. And I thought I'd get that again when you showed us. Can you fucking imagine? This is what I tell people when they go to not believing, it's the line, and it's not mine. Somebody, I don't know if it was in this group or somewhere, that how many cemeteries were there around your kids' elementary school? That they actually planned for them in advance. And this was another line that really, I had to read this and then walk away and then come back. But this was another one, that invasion is a structure, not an event. And so when we look out at the justice system or at the education system or that's all the structure of invasion, and it's still happening. Oh, and that they're talking about the Grace Hospital, and I know it wasn't, but I keep thinking of Grace Hospital here, that the women at the hospital represented a more moral and physical contagion. And I think one of the things that's so evident to me here is the projection, right? The savages are the ones who are seeing, not the ones who are seen. It's yeah. And that thing you mentioned too, the privately owned campground on top, I just had to get up and walk away. I just couldn't even, yeah. And that TB was leaking from reserves. Oh man, it's just the you'd have to like contort yourself to think this way. I don't know how people do it. And this one was, I think, very indicative of what the whole goddamn plan was. That the government group responsible for the administration as if it were a task of the Inuit people, was the Department of Mines and Resources. What does that have to say about the impetus behind this whole thing? So, and just two other things, that there is no word for disability in Indigenous languages. And that the bodies of the children who were murdered one way or another were only returned to the families if the families could pay for that travel. And this was after the kids were stolen. Yeah. So this was a very powerful read, and I yet again think this should be mandatory for anyone.
Yeah. I think that RV really brought up those feelings again here in Red Deer, because it has always bothered me how much of the Indian residential school grounds have been sold off to farmers, and especially the Red Deer Industrial School. Like, that's farmland. And I don't know how, as a farmer, people make peace with farming on top of dead children. Just like I can't imagine putting an RV on top of dead children. Like, this is just so normalized in Canada. And then people, have spooky time ghost story on TikTok talking about the time they went camping, and it's like, how many of these stories are because you parked your RV over top of a, you know, mass grave of Indian children that were murdered so that you can be a proud American or a proud Canadian? Like, it's disgusting. And it's just so normalized here. And yeah, I remember reading about and it's horrific thinking about this principal that was kind of fighting with the Department of Indian Affairs and trying to have the graves on a road allowance because of the stink that was coming from the not properly buried children, and how when they started digging they realized they were in mud. And all I can think of is those are those are our babies. And like you so well said, Marnie, they were stolen, and we weren't even allowed to be there when they were buried. And it was usually a brother or a sister or somebody else who had to dig those graves, and you're not allowed to grieve them. But you can just imagine a child trying to dig in a bunch of mud, getting yelled at while grieving someone. And that's just normal Canada by those wonderful church people. Aren't they wonderful? They're just lovely people. And the fact that churches still don't have their committees for reconciliation, like, it's just, yeah, it's a lot. So, Wendy, would you like to chime in?
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you for assigning this reading. Thank you for the discussion tonight, and thank you for that reminder of just this is a challenging read for all of us, but especially appreciate your connection to your granny and bringing her memory into this conversation. I appreciate you sharing that. I think I certainly learned several things that deepened in reading this. I think the part that I felt myself kind of most intensely, when you're reading and you can kind of feel yourself getting worked up, was when they were talking about the Magdalene laundry and the different ways that enabled me to make connections between the choices made with residential schools and then the other parts of systems. So I think that benefited me greatly, because I think that interconnectivity is really deepening for me, and helps me reflect on those systems were the earlier versions of our current systems. So there are ways that this interconnectivity connects to choices that are made now, and um, that it is the opposite of trivial when to think about these issues. So I think um, just really grateful for the time and effort that went into preparing this report. I can only imagine just what it reopens for people every time they have to prepare a report. Um, really appreciated all the ways that they pulled in, statements from TRC, statements from survivors. Just really, it's worth our time to read it. If they are taking the time to write it, like we can take the time to read it. And I think, um, in terms of those systems, I think it strengthened the echoes, which are certainly in many of the other readings we've done. But just kind of that paternal, patriarchal approach that is interwoven into very Eurocentric systems. And so, one thing I noticed about the writing in this particular reading that I really appreciated was there were some very powerful sentences in there that kind of, I didn't see those same kinds of sentences in some of the earlier reports. Like the one that's in my mind right now was, you know, really talking about the weight of the system, the strength of the system, all those things, but then explicitly making the contrast and saying, therefore, this speaks to the strength of Indigenous people. And so, like, there were some of those sentences that I really I was thinking a lot about the authors. I was thinking a lot about the work when they made those sentences, because I was like, those are the sentences that really need to be alongside any of these discussions. So just really appreciated that. I think um, it also drew a strong through line to um, life and death and connectivity across generations. It talks about the complexity of tracing that, but really stands out for me. Um, I think this helped deepen my understanding of uh, after lives have been taken in this way. Um, why it is so important to acknowledge and to have those families able to process. Like there's a lot of things that were taken, including closure or working with community and with family through these losses. So just anyway, these were really powerfully um, woven throughout this writing. And I think, you know, uh, a couple of themes that we've often talked about in our discussions that came up for me as well. That idea of safety, where really we're not safe until we're all safe. White settlers are really um, not often thinking that way because they haven't experienced a lack of safety. So that was in my mind a lot as I was reading this. Um, can easily think about the vulnerability of each of us when we are in those earliest years. And so just that, I think that connected to the idea of safety for me, um, and really helped me to think a lot about families and that vulnerability. I think the other thing, just as we've been talking this evening, and just the example shared earlier that Carol was sharing about, like, when do we stop having to pay? I mean, I think actually it told me a lot about that people who choose to say things like that tells me a lot about how limited they are in understanding their own identity and positionality. They don't actually understand very much. They are actually a product of the systems we're talking about because there's resonant reminders throughout this and every other thing we've read that Eurocentric approach is going to put cost over human lives and humanity. Where's the cost? Where's the efficiencies? So I heard that resonating in the like, when do we stop having to pay? I'm like, wow, you're still in the system of the dollars are worth the most, and you're thinking of it that way. And so it's really revealing like kind of the limited awareness they have of who they are. And I think, why take the time to do that? I think people struggle, especially when they're in that like part of like, how much is this costing me? To understand what the value add is. And just, I think the value add for me, the reason that I am so grateful for this group and all the readings we do, is that deepening that awareness of our own identity does mean we are informed about how to make better decisions every day. Like I feel it's so big, like the problems are so built in to what's been built here and what's been imposed here. And I'm connected to that as a white settler. I feel, therefore, it is my responsibility to keep understanding who am I in this society right now? How am I going to make better decisions every day? And how do I hold myself with care and compassion when I make mistakes, because those are also going to be constant. Like I do think the other thing that these conversations have helped me with is, because I am a white settler, because I was raised in North America, my baseline of thoughts are built from that same system. So sometimes I have to say things, sometimes I have to do things. I can't unsee those things being wrong or being fit from that system. But I feel like the taking the time to read these things isn't, I'm not doing it so that I can be a martyr or put on myself like how bad I am. I think it's more like, well, what are you going to do about it? What have you learned that means you're going to take a step further away from that instead of just reiterating that. And I guess, I do see a lot of the role of Canada. I see a lot of the role of white settlers. I see a lot of the roles of how any system of power at that time, well, they're all moving in alignment in the same direction. So I think churches and the role that churches have, and I am a Christian person. That is part of my own positionality. And I find what is interesting is I'm continuing to work on, how do I say words like colonialism? How do I say words like, where do you think all of the means that we have actually comes from? It continues to be hard to find ways to bring that up in conversation, and continues to be complex because, as you said, Michelle, oh, those churchy people, like it's kind of internally a struggle for me, because I want certain things out of faith, and I wrestle with it all the time. And I also feel like I'm not benefiting who I can be in this society now if I check out from that. So it means like being a Christian now, and also like keep unpacking, keep figuring out a way to bring it up, keep figuring out ways to like course correct my constant thoughts, my actions, things like that. So anyway, all that to say, um, none of this is easy, and certainly maybe I'll just end on something. Michelle, you said it long, long, long ago to me, but I think about it almost every day, which is we have so much. Like we just have so much, and that makes it mean that I have enough to spend the time to read this and to figure these things out. And yeah, it puts things in perspective. So thank you, and I hope to hear a little bit more maybe in the rest of the discussion. But just really, really good to be back here. It's January. It's another year. We've we've got another year ahead and it's a frustrating world, but we have each other. So thanks, Michelle.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack from what everybody had to say. And so I invite everybody to unmic themselves and you know, just chime in on a lot of these concepts and such. And um, yeah, I definitely have been. Marnie kind of said it earlier, where you read something and then you walk away for a bit. That was this entire report. Like you read a page and you're just like wanting to throw something. It's like we gotta like have a punching bag right by in order to release those ugly feelings. Kind of back to what you guys were talking about, you know, when are we gonna quit paying for these things? It was actually a really common theme from the colonizers throughout this report. Was that like, well, what is the cheapest way to bury someone? Well, what is the cheapest way to do this? What is the cheapest way? Right? Because these aren't people and their deaths are ungrievable. So really we don't care. So how do we deal with this? Right? And the concept of Indian affairs, just not maintaining cemeteries. Like I wasn't part of the conversation at any point in time. Uh, and they talked about fires that would burn down all of the wooden crosses and the wooden fences, and that they were never properly maintained anyway. And I just think I just want I want anyone else to imagine when a cemetery, the cost on the budget line for the city, that just being taken off, that just being erased, and that never being a thing. And yet so normalized when it comes to natives, right? Um, and that should be a part of every municipality. That should be a part of every, place that a residential school was in conjunction with Indian affairs, because those graves shouldn't be there. Those graves absolutely should not be there. So the very minimum they could have done was maintain them, the very, very minimum, let alone sell them to private owners so that they can farm over the top of them. Um, yeah, it was really disturbing to know how little our lives are, because I see it today, and with the way we're treated by the police, I see it today by the way Canadians are, and they talk about the price. And I'm going to say two things about that. First and foremost, like people just settled here, were given land. So I just think of the gravity of that alone. If someone from India comes here today and they have to pay minimum $300,000 for a house on a small plot of land in this city, right? But the ancestors that came here were just given that. I have Métis script that was just taken away from my family as well. So like you lose your actually native land, you lose the small little script that was given to you, and now, you know, settlers have the audacity to complain about what they're paying when there's never been an understanding of treaty partnership. The $5 a year that we get has never increased with inflation in any capacity. All of the resources development that have been taken from these lands have never been shared with Indigenous people. We have never gotten dollar to dollar funding for infrastructure. And the National Indigenous Economic Strategy really talks about this in depth. So whenever anybody says something like, wow, when are we going to quit paying for them? Like, also a reminder to everybody that Stephen Harper, on the last minute of the last second that he was prime minister, exonerated the Catholic churches from paying Indigenous people. So we actually were never given the money that we fought for in court and were ordered to be given, because he exonerated the Catholic Church from being able to pay us. So they stole our land. They don't give us treaty money. They don't share the resources. And prime ministers can just exonerate mass genocide and human rights violations. And I'm just gonna bring up this TikTok this young white guy did. It was very funny, and he said, every time Canadians go into a war, we're so brutal and disgusting and horrible people that the next, Geneva Convention adds new war crime definitions because the Canadians did it. They're like, yeah, that doesn't seem like that's the right thing to do. We should probably make that a war crime for the next wars because we do it first as Canadians. We create those war crimes and those atrocities first so that they have to literally make a Geneva Convention and be like, so when the Canadians did this is wrong? Because as you can read through this report in the 60s, even they were all like, yeah, whatever, just sell it off. It's no big deal. Like, this is part of the fabric of Canada is genocide and being a part of this system. So yeah, there's a lot I want to say more, but it's just like, how do I even start to unpack that with people who are not coming into this conversation in good faith anyway, right? So, and that's all the time online, obviously. So, yeah, I'm always evaluating my relationship online for that reason. So I just assume people want to come in good faith. So, does anybody else want to chime in about the report or about the conversation?
Yeah, I'll chime in now. I didn't get to read I didn't get to read the whole thing yet. It's going to happen. But in the first part of reading it, I was really struck how I am absolutely horrifically appalled that from 2010 to 2018, I was part of, not that whole time, but restructuring the Alberta curriculum to be up to date. And there was Indigenous consultation, and the social studies was approved and ready to be piloted. And it was telling the truth in ways that children could understand. And it was part. I'm I don't know if everything was fully agreed upon, but I do know that it was definitely in the right direction. And then this government comes in, trashes it all for Jason Kenney's view of fucking 20,000 war veterans. And like that's when I've never been political. Well, I've always been political, but never been political before. And I'm like, fuck you. So it was so wrong. And it's just so appalling that the fact, like you said, Michelle, this is the first time we've had documentation to give people. This is the first time as an educator I've had the documentation right there. You Google it, it's for free. It's right there. We have what we need to tell the truth and have the truth in our education system. And I have to say, I am so angry at how I was lied to. Those fucking Connecticut's where we were taught that Canada was, I wrote it down. This is what I remember from grade 5 social studies. Canada's a melting pot. Everybody gets along and is assimilated with the English primary and French secondary language. Canada's a patchwork quilt where everything is, there's little cultures here and little cultures here, and they're all sewn together. Like lies. And the othering as Indigenous culture being in the past. Oh, this is what their longhouses looked like. This is what their teepees looked like. And it really was othering. And it's only been for me like in the last 15 years getting like even in teacher education, we had one class on culture. One class. I was at the University of Lethbridge when there was I remember there were 6 spaces in education reserved for Indigenous students. And I was not, I was not one of the ones fighting this because I'm like, yeah, like this makes sense to me. But I also didn't have the capacity or the knowledge as an ally to speak out and tell people to sit down and shut up. Like, I'm so angry at the lack of education, and I'm now in my 50s and just starting the white supremacy education that I need to repair this.
Hmm.
The Indigenous education that I like, that's, I haven't been able to come to book club, but I've also been nervous to come to book club because I'm like, I don't want to say or do the wrong thing. Like, I don't. And that's part of the passivity. If I'm, you know, if you're not going to say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And if you're not going to say the right thing, better not say it. Right. And Wendy, I want to say, raised Catholic here, Jesus flipped tables. This is a time for flipping tables. So, yeah, I'm going to, part of me is like, oh, I already did the advocacy that I could do. Well, this is, nobody's listening. No, like, this is the time. This curriculum, because that's my area, is going to become law this year, and it is wrong. It is wrong, and it is based on lies, and it is not okay for the next generations. Going to tell you something that just happened a few years ago. So I have a stepson with autism. So he doesn't always understand social situations, and he has a hard time with social studies. But when he was in, I think it was grade 7. Yeah, it was grade 7. I knew they were doing Indian residential schools as part of his social studies. So he came home and I said, so you're learning about Indian residential schools. What did you learn? And he said to me, this is what he took away from class, that the bad Indian kids got sent to jail. That's what this tender little boy who struggles with social situations took away from social studies class. And at the moment, all I could do was write his teacher and say, hey, something went seriously sideways with your teaching in this. And so, like, I corrected it at home. But how many of us have come away with that belief? And it's just so appalling. Like, even in the first 26 pages of this document, I did not know the connect. Like, I thought Indian residential schools, yes, I knew there was, Catholic and other churches involved. I knew it was government. I didn't realize the connection with all of the other institutions conspiring to do this. Like, there is so much re-education that needs to happen. My dog's coming in to see me. Hi, baby. Do you want to say hi? There. There's a dog.
Maybe this would be a good time to say, and it kind of builds on what Wendy was talking about, how, the language in this report is more involved than what we've seen in the National Inquiry, which was more involved than what we've seen in the TRC, which is way more evolved than what we see in RCAP. So, I think too that as the facts and the truth come out too, is that people feel more compelled to write the truth in the more truthful way. And I think that for survival reasons, people were just trying to say the facts without giving it the emotion that it rightfully deserves. like we would, and I share this comparison because I was listening to the CBC, and rightfully so, had a Holocaust conversation happening, just based on this like Japanese like um, university or museum or art place that had a suitcase, and the amount of work that went into trying to understand the story of the suitcase. And it ended up being this little girl, and who was gassed and murdered. And they found her brother, and he told a little bit about her and her personality, and a little bit about their family history to give that suitcase a lot more depth and meaning. And you know, to this day, we have to have National Ribbon Skirt Day on January 4th, my birthday, just because um, a little girl can't formally wear her ribbon skirt without a teacher's aide, discriminating against her and telling her she's not dressed up enough. One, that's classist, but two, that's culturally insensitive. Three, it's that dehumanizing of a little Indigenous girl again. Like it's that constant Canadian playbook at play, regardless of whether the new teacher's aide is white or not, because new immigrants are taught to hate natives too, right? So whether you're a newer Canadian or whether you're, fourth generation, that anti-Indigenous bias is just so ingrained in all of our systems. And, the concept of systems keep kind of coming up in this. And that's why I struggle so much trying to talk to people about, their role in the system. And as a surveyor, as someone who does geomatics, like you can see surveying's role in the system, right? I know some of the first laws that it's not okay to shoot and kill surveyors was because white farmers were like, no, I think we should kill them. That's going to come up more in November too when we're talking about the book The Medicine Line, um, which I'm super excited to read. I kind of started flipping through it because I'm this conversation of Trump just annexing Canada. Um, it's so disrespectful, and it doesn't tell our history very well. But that bigger picture, that you have enough people cheering this, like these traders that need to obviously leave Canada immediately. I don't care what they think their roots are here. Anyway, yeah, that's what kind of got me interested again in that conversation, because geomatics history, we're just going to erase that. We're just going to erase the War of 1812. We're going to erase the international diplomacy that was happening. We're going to erase treaties, like it's just because we purposely don't educate our populace with information about being treaty partners. People have no problem being annexed to the US. Like, that's insanity. I can't even believe that these conversations are on our mainstream news. You know, it's one thing to make jokes on TikTok, but for the mainstream news to not be pushing back on this and entertaining, well, what's both sides of this conversation? There's no fucking both sides of this conversation. Like, empower the Canadian base. If you like, why are you not talking about the things I'm talking about? Remember, I'm just the dumb Indian in the bigger picture of Canadian mosaic, right? So, which I'm saying tongue in cheek, obviously. And I say again, as natives, we have to know our history. We have to know the history of the other nations. We have to know the history of the municipalities, the history of the provincial, the history. Like, it's just, we have to know. But Canadians, they don't need to know. They don't care. They can just join the states and not think twice about being trumpeteers. I don't know what you want to call them. So, um, yeah, I don't know. Just disappointing. And I will say that in the States, that instead of calling Indian residential schools here, they're called Indian boarding schools there. They also have graves, right? And they're just starting to do that work of understanding that too. Their conversation is not as extensive as ours is, because we had the TRC and it went national, and we have, those volumes of report to reference. But in the States, they're not having that same type of like reflection and reporting of it. It's just kind of each nation is doing their own work based off of what they know. So yeah, interesting that, and now of course with the very conservative viewpoint kind of infiltrating all of the politics right now, you kind of have that bigger picture of denying that truth and trying to suppress that truth for longer. So yeah. See, nobody's really unmuted, so I don't know if anybody wants to chime in or.
Michelle, I unmuted because, well, first of all, I appreciate everyone's comments about this. I look forward to reading it, but and the seriousness in it. But I don't know if everyone is familiar with Naomi Klein or not, but she's one of my favorite people, and she talks a lot about politics and climate change and sort of the wrongs that have gone on. And she says that we have to stop accepting all of this as the way it is.
Mm.
Because this is another conversation that I hear, like, well, that's just the way it is, or that's the reality now. It's not the reality now. That there's nothing about this that is the reality. It is, with the topic we're speaking of, white ethnocentric bias, racism, and we have to stop accepting it. And when I speak to my neighbors, I mean, I don't even know if they even, like, if they'll ever speak to me again, but I don't care. I feel like I have to. I'm compelled to do this. They don't know, and I think I'm not an expert, but I sure know a little bit more than them on this, thanks to you. And well, I'm not going to accept this as the mainstream. I'm not going to accept it as the norm. And each one of us has a voice, and we may think that our voices are small, but they're really not. Because I knew that I had rattled this woman when I said, no, that is not something I would ever say. I think it's inappropriate. I think it speaks to, your white bias. And I said, and I mean this with all kindness and ignorance. It's ignorance, and ignorance in the sense of not knowing, and you could know. There's ways that you could know. But just back to my comment, like, we have to stop it. It's not mine, it's Naomi Klein's comment. We have to stop accepting this as the way it is, or the norm, for everything, for the politics. I could go on and on about the idiot running this province, but I won't. But this is not the norm. We pay for this woman to she begrudges people, just basic health care. Like, we could be doing all kinds of things. We could be setting up primary care units on reservations and doing all kinds of things like this. We could help in lots of ways, but we are going to spend our money sending her down to the Trump inauguration.
I know. I actually, somebody brought up Jason Kenney, and it's just another example of a MP that was under Stephen Harper, who was a proud Catholic, Jason Kenney, and he, was a part of that system that chose to exonerate the Catholic Church from paying Indian residential school survivors too, right? So, like, all of these systems work together, and we can find money for a trip to go to Mar-a-Lago. We can find money when it comes to the inauguration of Trump, but we can't when it comes to what we're talking about here. And that's the dehumanization again of Indigenous people, and not including them properly in the K to 12 curriculum, let alone the university curriculum, right? So yeah, I appreciate that. Wendy, I see you're unmuted. Please chime in.
Yeah, I was going to, this is a little bit of a different topic or focus, but it relates mostly to just like a personal experience over the holiday break. And we've talked in this conversation about what we learn different ages, I like to notice when I have growth in myself, but I also have enjoyed sometimes that on our different streaming services, you can sometimes see really old TV shows that are like, you can watch them again. Anyway, there was this TV show that I watched when it came out. I was probably about 12. And I remembered it because it was one of the first, this was back when I had cassette tapes, and it was like one of the first tapes that I got was the soundtrack for this TV show. Anyway, so I decided to rewatch. I'm most of the way through the seasons because I think it only had 6 seasons. Anyway, it was Northern Exposure. I don't know if anybody watched that in the early 90s, but I was rewatching it. Um, and what I'm really noticing, because you notice different things, and certainly when I was 12, thought about things very differently. Um, but there's interesting dynamics between Indigenous people and white people in that show. There's interest, but they're in their everyday lives. So I just am kind of enjoying that. But anyway, what I wanted to bring up was something that I just love the way they did this particular episode, but it was about Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving in this little Alaskan town. So it's this tiny Alaskan town if you haven't watched the show. And there is a doctor who's in his late 20s and he's kind of disgruntled about the fact he has to live in, this nowhere place in Alaska. And then everyone else is just kind of these interesting people who are living their lives there. But the Thanksgiving, the way they celebrated Thanksgiving was that and I don't know if this is accurate to what happens in Alaska or not, but they did this in the show, and I was like, this is kind of awesome. They celebrated Thanksgiving as well as the Day of the Dead, so they were kind of pointing directly to that this is actually not a celebration time for everybody in the same way. But they had this they would throw tomatoes. So the indigenous people in the town would just randomly throw tomatoes at the white people in the town, but then they would they would get hit with this tomato, and then they would, and it was like hit hard. Like they would like really throw a tomato hard, and there's this big bloody looking stain, except it's a tomato. And then the white people would wave and be like, "Oh, happy Thanksgiving," and they because they were in relationship with each other in this little town. But this man, who's this doctor from outside, he is completely like incensed that this is a thing and can't understand, like, why do we have to be so uncivilized and throw tomatoes at each other and all that stuff. And everyone in the town, whether it's his indigenous friends in the town or his anyone in the town is just like, yeah, it's fine. Don't you think that that's a small thing that's a good reminder and like whatever. Like they've all kind of had their learning go a lot further than his and characters in this show. But I was just like, I didn't uptake any of that when I watched this in the 90s. But I'm surprised in a good way at the way that they name on its face the relationship between white people and indigenous people in ways that you know it it brings it up in a way that is worth thinking about. And I hope that's not off topic to bring that up in this conversation, but I was just thinking about it because you do see things differently over time in your life. And there aren't that many shows I watch from the 90s that I like, I don't know, that I notice things that I think about now, and I think the issue is talked about in a good way. So just wanted to bring it up.
I love that. So my family has always talked about being from the Mayflower, and we finally found like the thread that kind of shows that with ancestry, because we have access to documents we never had before, and it's interesting. So the two things I want to get done this year is like be official through the family lineage. And so once you're a part of there's 100 families that came from the Mayflower, and like each one of them has like their own like org, like their own official nonprofit. That's all the descendants that come from this one family, right? So I want to get that, and then that way you can become a member of the Mayflower. So I've signed up for their emails, and what's really interesting is that they do like educational things. And one of their ones that was coming up that was a conflict with what I was doing was, how it wasn't actually that bad, our relationship with the natives, and how they're trying to basically rewrite the history to be colonial, right? And have it okay with what they did, because every Thanksgiving I hear the stories about the Pilgrims and the Indians, and I always think this is bullshit, and I know it. But regardless, like it's unpacking that. It's really unpacking that, and clearly, the Mayflower Society as well as the Family Society, they'll probably never want to unpack that. But the more and more part Native, part Mayflower families, the more they'll have to. The truth is a truth. So I'm hoping that as society will start unpacking these things and moving away from this conqueror conquered to treaty partnership and that conversation, I hope one day. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Wendy. Don't think it's because there's actually new TV shows that are like Anime Anguash has a it's on TV, and there's a new comedy that's coming from the north that was done by Indigenous people. So like, I never want to, stifle that conversation because maybe Carol didn't know or Angela didn't know, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, Marnie, I know you were unmuted, and Angela, you're back. So
And I was unmuted and I have no idea what I was going to say.
that's all right.
No, I mean, part of the, just a little bit about the TV shows, like it is the exposure that we never had as kids. Like, yes, I watched Northern Exposure only because that's what was on one of the two channels that we got. Like, there wasn't this intentionality. And we have so much information and so much that can be shared now that never could before. There was one show, oh, I can't remember, Trickster? It was on a couple, was that the name of the show, Trickster? Yeah. And I was stunned when it was canceled because it was really a great show. Um, yeah, and what you said, Michelle, about like elementary education, and I didn't know that Jason Kenney was with Harper when the Catholic Church was exonerated. Like that's just that makes me so nauseous that happened. But with Jason Kenney and the curriculum, like it really is about getting into teacher education and how do we teach. Like I was taught by white teachers about these Connecticut's. And so that is one of the keys is getting into teacher education and teaching why this is so important. And it is not negotiable. It is mandatory. And my other thought is like because I want to be a better ally, I realize now I'll probably never actually get fully to where I should be, but how like I'm intentionally taking the time to do this, and it really worries me about the people that are not going to ever want to do this and that impact on society that doesn't need to happen. Like, just, it's wrong. What is happening is so wrong. There should never be this denialism about residential schools. There should just, this shouldn't be happening. And I know that I'll speak out. I know that I'll keep learning. I know that I'll do this, but there really has to be a change in paradigm, and I'm going to say the story badly because I don't know which Indigenous culture this was. I don't know. I don't remember where I heard this, but there was a prophecy that at some point in time, everyone will ask the yellow skin how to save the world. And it was from a medicine wheel teaching. And I thought, like, that's just always stuck with me. And it feels like now is the time to say, how do we beyond acknowledgement, return to Indigenous ways of being in the world without fossil fuels, without this excessive recreational traveling that is just destroying things. Like, how do we actually have this paradigm shift
Well,
to
I
right the
just
wrongs of the past?
Yeah, I think it's been exactly 1 year since Sean Carlton came to our book club and talked about his book. And he's kind of a leading expert on the denialism, in the sense that as a white man, as a prof, people will typically listen to him. So that's why you'll see me like reshare a lot of his stuff on social media. That, and he was kind enough to come to the book club and talk about his book. So, but that bigger picture is that, you know, it it does take an army of people, and it's also the voting, etc., as well. um that bigger picture that, if you didn't know that Jason Kenney was a part of Harper's team that um exonerated the Catholic Church, like most people don't know. So I know for me, like all of my social media is suppressed, right? So I'll share something, and like I will see somebody get so many more, like, conversations and such going from innocuous things, let alone something of substance, right? So like there does have to be an understanding. Like, it's not that there isn't the information. We had the stories of our ancestors, we had RCAP, we had now the volume 4, and now this new report. Sean Carlton and academia has been putting together the fight for against denialism as well. So, and there is a massive, collective of Indigenous sovereignty, as the root for climate change really. So it and that's really what the struggle is that white people, white men especially, like a Jason Kenney or a Pierre Polvier, know this. They know that and a lot of people on TikTok think the reason why TikTok is getting shut down is because it's more of a leftist, anti-establishment type of community that has grown so big on TikTok. So, to eliminate it immediately is the best option. Because at least a Zuckerberg and an Elon Musk can suppress posts like mine, right? And conversation like mine. So yeah, I never want people to lose hope. Um, you know, I'm working off the ancestors that spoke in the RCAP, spoke in the TRC, spoke in the National Inquiry, spoke in this report, right? So all I'm doing is amplifying their messages by trying to talk about these things. Whereas Jason Kenney, Pierre Polvier, they were just pulling shit out of their ass, right? Trump's shit out of his ass. So, like they don't have real substance. There's no facts there. It's just feelings. I just feel like I'm a good guy, so therefore I should be in charge. So, yeah. Marnie,
And
go ahead. Or Carol.
Well, you go ahead. You go ahead, Carol. I can wait. I've taken
I'm
notes
sorry.
this
I'm
time, so I
sorry. I
remember.
don't want you to forget what you have to say.
No,
because
I
I
took
wrote
notes
down
this
what you
time.
had
I
to
took
say.
notes. I learned.
Same here. But I just wanted to say, Pierre Poilievre, he was under Harper, and he is one of the people who made that really derogatory remark about Indigenous residential schools. And this guy is going to likely be the leader of Canada coming up. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. And one of the things that I've stopped doing is looking to leaders to make change. And I write, oh God, I write to everybody. I've written so many times to Danielle Smith about and Jason Kenney. And Jason Kenney, by the way, in my opinion, is a convenient Catholic. When it suits him to say something that sounds righteous, uh, or he wants to control something like reproductive rights for women, he's a Catholic. So, but writing letters, I mean, they have to log these letters. And I write letters all the time. You know I do, Michelle. um, so that's one way to get a voice. I'll tell you who responds to me. The people who respond to me are the NDP and the Liberals. The conservatives do not respond to me at all.
Yeah,
And
same.
I don't write hostile. I try to be very informed, and I try to give them statistics, and I try to say, and I always say, you do not have my vote. I will not vote for you. That's when they will answer you.
Well, not if you're native. Marty, please go ahead.
They don't answer me, even though I tell them that too. And that made me think of something I don't have in my notes, but when I became a Canadian citizen, which was just a couple of years ago, I was delighted because it's one of the only things in the TRC that's actually been implemented is in the citizenship ceremony, you have to honor the land you're on. So I was like, do you know what? It was such a load of bullshit. It was like maybe 25 seconds. And she just kind of like had a sentence she had to read and she read it. This is the judge. So, and one of the things I have written down here is that I have come to understand that my outrage about this is part of my racism. Because I mean, oh my God, how could this be? Instead of this is actually just how it is. This is how it is. So what are we going to do about it?
Yes.
And sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Yes, because I actually block people and their fake moral outrage a lot because it's like what you've just said to me is you dumb Indians have been too stupid to listen to for the last 150 years. But now that I am willing to, now I'm going to display my outrage when like we can't even grieve our own fucking children, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I've had to pay attention to the fact to just this is how it is. And I do get outraged. I mean, this document was it's outrageous. Or I don't know if outrageous is the right word, but it's fascinating in a gross way. The amount of effort that went into figuring this out, the thinking it through, the planning to do horrible things. It's just outrageous. Okay. So the other thing is about talking to people. There's a part of me now that just no longer has patience for talking to people who don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in working with the people who are willing to learn and are taking steps and to walk with them so we move forward. And that's not to say I don't name what I see happening. That's not to say I don't talk about it, but I'm not going to try and jolly people along into understanding things. If they'll come or they won't. I'm interested in people who are already on their way and wanting to learn from those people. And I have always a lot to learn. The thing about hope is interesting. I don't know if you've heard of this book. It's really good. It's written by a craniosacral therapist, very connected to land and to body. Really interesting. She has a whole thing in here where she talks about an interview that was done with Joanna Macy many years ago, who was asked, how do you I don't know what the question was, but something about hope and hopelessness. She said, well, you've got to hold them both. You've got to know that there's no hope, that this is the end of everything. You have to absolutely believe that. And you also have to know that this could be the beginning, that our descendants may already be sitting around the fire talking about how we got out of this. Those are both true, and you have to hold them both without either one diminishing the other. And so that's sort of a practice for me because it's very easy for me to see the hope. I'm pointing at my screen here. See the hopelessness, of this, but also holding that there is a possibility is, I think, it's very important for me. And There's a woman, she's Indigenous too, named Jennifer Lee Coble. And one of the things that she has said that I really hear is that, especially white people, we have a radical responsibility to resource, to find what is resourceful to us so we don't get lazy. We don't say, oh, I can't deal with this. We have to be able to come back all the time and be solid with it. And yeah, so I think, and then I have a quote on my wall from James Baldwin, and this I think says it too. What you were saying, Michelle, about the people you need to block. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
exactly. And that is very common for me. So, and this report obviously articulated that quite well. And I'll always say this about hope and hopelessness is that every child that's born is a hope, right? Um, my child, every time she writes an essay, every time she does whatever, it shocks me to remind me of the hope that's there, right? Um, there are shitty little human beings that are being raised by Jason Kenney's, etc. But you know, um, there are a lot of Native kids that are being raised to love themselves. My daughter's one of them. Um, so the more I see other Indigenous content creators and I reshare them and I know people see those because I see the likes, like the algorithms tell me when people see other people, they like it. So I know they're seeing that at least, not my post, but theirs. So yeah, it's the hope always is that there are others trying. And like right now I have a friend putting together another kind of like not a podcast but community circle and discussion about Canadian politics on TikTok, and I'm happy that she's doing that. That is fine for me. But that bigger picture is that the more Indigenous voices being heard, being listened to, because I've been suppressed. I've been suppressed for years now. But the newer ones, they're exciting for people to be a part of. So that makes me happy to see, especially our youth, our Two Spirit youth, getting a lot of views, getting a lot of shares, listened to. That makes me happy. That's the hope. That's the hope for me.
that was another thing that's come up elsewhere, as well as what was done to the Two Spirit folks. The gender, the harshness of the binary that was imposed.
And that's a big theme through Indian residential school, right? A huge theme. And funny enough, we have a local elder here in Calgary, and she told her story to me. She's told her story on my friend's podcast. And she told me that they shamed her by putting a dress on her and putting her in the girls' area, but she always did identify as a girl, so it worked out really good. But then when she left the school, she was expected to be and behave like a boy, so she did for most of her life. And only now that she's retired is she being her authentic self and transitioned to a woman. So, but yet having that foundation of memory of Indian residential school, being purposely made the wrong gender and purposely put in the wrong gendered area of the school, but ironically, that actually being who they were. So, yeah, it's crazy. So, all right. Oh, and you did say something earlier about disability and how there's no word for it. Um, One of my favorite things I keep coming across is the Maori who talk about folks with autism as in their own time and space. And I'm like, I bet you our people had something like that, but we just can't find it. I've always thought if I laid enough tobacco and I prayed for the right dream, it would come. So, yeah,
And I bet my people had it too, but it was wiped out from us as well. When we
yeah,
lost our indigeneity, we lost our connection to land, and we lost our connection to each other, or it was taken, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. And we
Geez.
became white.
Yeah, yeah.
Just wanted to say thank you for choosing this report and for this book club and for all you do. I really appreciate it, and I'm grateful.
Oh, me too, Kat. So I know you've been really quiet. I don't know why, but you do you. So for folks who are interested in doing more of the work, Kat is doing the um,
Settlers Book Club.
thank you.
Yes.
So there's more that you can read if you choose, and that's the next book coming up.
Yep, it's North of Nowhere by Marie Wilson, and she was a Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner. So this is her autobiography. And I don't know if it's middle age. I've reached menopausal rage or not, or if it's just things in the world. It's just not feeling that good these days. So I'm trying to calm down and regulate myself. So, but I'm grateful for all of you as well, and for all you said.
Yeah. And Kat is a part of the Reconciliation Action Group and also been doing the Nice Racism, a couple of chapters every week to try to help people understand how, and we kind of touched on it earlier, Marnie, with that, like, white rage that it's like, uh-huh, 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 that's great. So glad you're enraged. Yay, you. Um, that kind of concept where racism, especially in Canada, we think we're so nice and it's so patronizing and condescending and the lack of understanding of oppression dynamics, let alone treaty partnership, broken treaty, 150 years of like brokenness and us being like, shut up, we pay you, it's fine. Like, fuck, this relationship so gross, right? So I appreciate you all coming. I appreciate all of the folks who shared what you shared. And I put in the chat February's anti-Black racism, sexism, and discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Commission report because, as you all know, the TRC and the National Inquiry make it very clear we need to be doing more anti-racism training, but also there are many Indigenous people who are part Black, and there's a lot of anti-Blackness. I would argue that we have so much anti-Indigenous, even from the Black community. I've seen it today on TikTok, where it's like, let's talk about progressive politics, but fuck the natives. Let's not have them on here. And it's like, okay, no problem. I won't chime in then. But that bigger picture is that is the sentiment in a lot of newer Canadians, the older Black folks from out east. That's their attitude towards us prairie natives. So like we have a lot of work to do when it comes to racism, but we also have to understand how much anti-Blackness there is. And many of I still promote Walls Down Collective and Stop the Stack YYC here in Calgary because of the anti-Black sentiment that's here as well. And it all goes together because to me there are just as many Black natives as well, right? So they're facing that extra intersectional hate of anti-Indigenous, anti-Blackness. I'm trying to still unpack ableism in general. And misogyny, obviously, massive part of all of this. So, as the National Inquiry pointed out in its pages. So, yeah. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciated being able to be part of this.
As always, thanks for coming, Carol, and know that I was praying for you.
I did know that. Thank you for that. And I think I am really looking forward to being able to really see how in March. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good
Okay,
night.
take care, Carol. Bye.
Take
Thank
care,
you, Michelle.
everyone.
Thanks so much, Michelle.
Yeah, you bet. Take care, folks.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye.